Hey everyone, welcome to the third episode of FCPI podcast. I am Brinda Namputri and I'm the host for today's episode. So, FCPI has initiated these podcasts to discuss and explore different arenas of clinical pharmacy profession. So, to just recap, in the first episode, we discussed about infectious diseases clinical pharmacy. And in the second episode, we discussed about transplant pharmacy. Today, we are here to discuss about how to build a career in research as a clinical pharmacist. And I'm very excited to do this episode with my mentor, Dr. Smita Charani. So Dr. Charani started her career as an infectious diseases clinical pharmacist at Cambridge University Hospital in the UK. And after that, she started a career as a research pharmacist at Imperial College almost 10 years back, where she also did her PhD and postdoctoral research. And currently, she is working as an associate professor at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. So with this brief introduction itself, you would have understood that she's one of the most apt person to talk about this topic of how to build a career in research, because she's someone who started her career as a clinical pharmacist and then moved into a research career. And on a personal note, Smita has actually played a very important role in shaping my career. So like her, I also moved from a full-time clinical pharmacy position to a research pharmacy job. And she's the one who introduced me to qualitative research. And she's currently one of my PhD supervisors as well. So without any further delay, let me invite Dr. Smita Charani to the third episode of FCPA podcast.
Thank you very much, Rinda. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the introduction.
How are you, Smita?
Very good, thank you. It's a bit windy here in Cape Town, so if you hear the wind in the background, I apologize.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So like I told in the introduction, you started your career as an infectious diseases clinical pharmacist. So do you remember what actually motivated you to then move from a clinical pharmacy position to a research pharmacy role?
There was a sequence of events. So when I graduated as a pharmacist in 2002, I knew that I wanted to work in hospital pharmacy. I had already made that decision. And at the time, the clinical pharmacy training, there is a postgraduate training in the UK. So you qualify as a pharmacist, and then once you're in the hospital track, you have to take on postgraduate training. So you do a certificate in clinical pharmacy where you go through all the rotations of different specialties that you work with in the pharmacy, in the hospital setting, through intensive care, oncology, pediatrics, and you do training for each of those special parts of the clinical training. And then after that, there is an opportunity to do a diploma in clinical pharmacy. And by then, I actually had enough of being affiliated with the same institution. I'd done all of my training at the School of Pharmacy at University of London. And I was very fortunate that I got, the first thing I learned is you have to always ask. So I asked the department, if there is funding, can I do an MSc in infectious diseases? And to my surprise, they said yes, and they funded it. So the first lesson I always have to people is when you work for institutions and organizations, always ask, because you never know what opportunities may be available to you. And I wouldn't have been able to do the MSc if it hadn't been paid for by the department, but the department had a budget for education and they were willing to spend it for my MSc, which was fantastic. So I got that break and I did my MSc in infectious diseases as a distance learning course with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And they're very organized in how they do the distance learning course. Following that, I was at a crossroads because I didn't know what to do next. And at the time, there were very severe and critical Clostridium difficile infection outbreaks in many of our hospitals. And there was an inquiry nationally. And one of the interventions that the government implemented was to ensure that each hospital has an antibiotic pharmacist. And so then I took that role in the final year of my MSc. As I was working, I was an antibiotic pharmacist. And then I decided to come back to London, and I actually didn't have a job. So I came back to London and I was working as a locum. And I saw this opportunity for a research post at Imperial College in London. And I had no research background, I had no research experience, but I applied anyway. And I think because I had done the MSc, I was considered an eligible candidate. And that's really how I started my research career, by applying for this opportunity. And the second lesson I learned is to take risks, because what happened was that the job that was advertised, the research post, was only for 3 years. And I took that risk and I left a permanent post, because I had just accepted a permanent post in London after my locum. I was working as an antibiotic pharmacist at the Royal Free. And I walked away from a permanent post to take on this research post, which was only for 3 years. And it changed the course of my career. And, you know, I haven't actually looked back. It's been one opportunity after another. So I think sometimes it's important to step out of your comfort zone and try new things that may be different, because that's where growth and learning happens.
I mean, I completely understand what you were saying, because for me also, when I also started my career as a full-time clinical pharmacist in antimicrobial stewardship program, but I always had this interest to do something in research, but I didn't have the right guidance, or I didn't know what, as a clinical pharmacist, I could do in a research arena. I was lucky to meet you at the right time, and you actually guided me into this research path. So were there any such mentors or someone senior in your team who actually guided you, or who made that transition from a clinical pharmacy to a research pharmacy more easy for you?
So I was very lucky that my boss at Imperial College was Professor Alison Holmes, who herself is a ID doctor. But she had training in Boston in the USA, where she was very used to having worked with clinical pharmacists in infectious diseases. And when she came back to the UK, she set up this very multidisciplinary team to both carry out research in antibiotic stewardship and infection, but also to practice infection management in the hospital settings. So she and her vision for having a multidisciplinary team really was kind of the platform from where I was able to achieve my trajectory in research. She understood the need to have pharmacists as part of research teams, but also as part of clinical practice in infection management. And for the first 3 years I worked, I didn't have a PhD. I was working, just doing research in antibiotic stewardship, but we were very successful, and our research got noticed, particularly the behavioral science research that we did around infection management and antibiotic decision-making in hospitals, and it created opportunities for us to work internationally. And one of the other breaks that I guess I owe to Alison, I'm very grateful I had the opportunity to work with her, is that she enabled me to do my PhD alongside the work that I was contracted to do as a researcher. So, and she fought my corner for that at Imperial, because I wasn't a first-class student. I'm not embarrassed to say, when my pharmacy degree, I got a 2.2. I didn't get a 2.1. And then I did an MSc. So actually, to even be able to qualify for a PhD at Imperial, I think Alison had to argue my case. But again, I say these things because I want people to understand there are many different paths to achieving what you want to achieve, and not to be put off by going down routes that aren't the path that everybody else goes down. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah. I mean, that actually brings to my next part of the discussion, that is about doing PhD if you want to do a career in research, because that's a question that I get always from clinical pharmacy students, budding clinical pharmacists, like, what is the use of doing a PhD? Even I had this question before, like when I just graduated, because I had done like 6 years of PharmD, and I was like, I'm done with studies. I don't want to do another degree. And then I hear about doing a PhD, and I was like, PhD is for someone who wants to do a job as a teaching faculty. That was my perception, and I think that's the perception for most. So, but it is only after I started doing PhD, I would honestly say that even the first 1.5 years, I didn't really enjoy doing PhD because I didn't know what exactly I was doing. But once I got the hang of it, that is when I understood that, okay, PhD is more than just getting a better job. It's about
Or a
learning new
title.
skills. Yeah, absolutely. It's about learning new skills, meeting people, networking, understanding new research arenas. So that was like a whole different journey after that. So according to you, is it important to do a PhD in if you want to do something in research, or if so, what is the added benefit that you see if someone is doing a PhD?
Look, exactly. And you asked me these questions, I remember. And when we were trying to convince you to do a PhD, but I think pharmacy as a profession is a really good profession. I think we often forget that. It gives you a lot of opportunities. It can take you in many different directions, whether it's industry, whether it's working in community, in public health, or in hospital settings. But I think it's also important to realize that the added benefit of postgraduate qualifications is about accruing knowledge and skills and diversifying your skill set. And what a PhD does, it allows you to diversify independently. It gives you a degree of growth and independence that other formal training routes won't give you. It's the highest form of academic qualification for a reason, because I think it really sets people up towards independence and to think differently and to learn differently, but also to apply the knowledge that you have very differently. So if you had told me when I graduated with a 2-2 from the School of Pharmacy in London in 2002 that I would be in University of Cape Town by 2024, running a program of research on intersectional research in antibiotic resistance, it was so far away from who I was in 2002, and this journey, a lot of it I owe to having taken the route of doing postgraduate training, doing a PhD to open these opportunities. And I think the other thing a PhD does, it's a leveler. So once you have a PhD in your chosen field, you're on a par with colleagues from many different diverse professions and backgrounds who've gone through the same process of training as you. And when you come together and you work together, it just elevates that experience to a different level, I find. And it allows you to be able to really think and work outside of your discipline in a very different way. And so for those reasons, I always think a PhD, as difficult as it can be, particularly in the early days when you don't really have a hang of what you're doing and there are uncertainty you go through, but that's all learning and growth. Yeah. I think despite those challenges, it is a very good skill to have. And the other thing to remember is after PhD, academia is not the only option you have.
Right.
It actually opens you to go back into industry at a high level, to go into science writing, into consulting, into working with funders and NGOs and international organizations. So it's not just an academic purpose that one gets a PhD, but it's gaining those skills to make you better at whatever you choose to do after the PhD.
Yeah, I remember like when I moved from a clinical pharmacy position to the research pharmacy side, I found it quite a challenge to understand the concepts and to look things from a different angle, because I have been in a hospital setting for so long. I kind of I would have overlooked a lot of things thinking that it's the normal practice, but it's actually when I came into research and when we started doing ethnographic research that I understood those subtle moments, subtle observations could have another meaning. And so in initial days, work was quite challenging for me, and it was like on the go that I understood, okay, this is how I should do, and I got a hang of it. How was it for you? Like because for me, at least, you were here with us, like for the initial 2-3 months, you were there with us and you literally handheld us into the research side. But for you, when you made the transition from a clinical pharmacy to research side, was it very difficult for you?
No, look, I think I've been very lucky. Part of it is also luck. I've always landed in doing things that I really enjoy. And I found a real sense of purpose and joy in the research that I do from very early on, before I was doing a PhD. And I think that really helped me. Is my one advice to people would be, if you want to go down the route, is you must choose a topic that really interests you, and that you really like doing. Because if you pick a topic that is not of interest, you have to look at the purpose. What is driving your work? If it's just because you want to get a PhD, it's not going to be easy. You have to really engage with the subject matter, and it has to be something that is of great interest to you, that you can work through the difficult days on this topic and have that purpose. I was very lucky I had that very early on. I can't say it will become easy for everybody to get there. But for me, because I took those risks, but the benefit of those risks was I always chose to do what I wanted and what I liked. And therefore, I have always had this space where I feel like I was motivated even through the difficult days. So the difficulties, for example, in my PhD was I had to do all of the data collection myself, including the quantitative data from patients. And that I remember one Easter weekend in London, I spent an entire week just in a computer room on my own, collecting data from the patient files, because I didn't have access to electronic records or an Excel sheet of all the patient records in one place. I had to do that myself. So I had that motivation. I really wanted to work with international colleagues, and when the opportunity came, I took that, and I came to India. That's how we met, right? And I went to France and Norway to collect data from different settings about antibiotic stewardship. And so for me, it wasn't very difficult, but there is you have to look at it in the bigger perspective. So of course it has an impact on, for example, your personal life. If you have a family, if you have a young family, it's more difficult to be dedicating so much time. And I think it's different for every person. So what works for one person and at what stage you do your PhD may not be right for somebody else. I don't necessarily believe that there is a right way of doing it, but there is a right way for different people. Every person has their time and place. Like I'm now supervising a student who's in their 60s, another one who's in their 20s. So I think it's important to realize it's never too late to pursue your interests and do a PhD. You don't have to follow a equation of, do my degree, do my postgrad, and then do my PhD. I got my master's in 2006. I didn't start my PhD till 2014, so 8 years later, because it was the right time for me. So I think it's important to be honest about the challenges on your personal life, sometimes on your family life. It is quite intense. For those 3 or 4 years, you become really immersed in your work. But it's also, if it's something that you like, it can also, if it's a topic of interest to you, and if you are with a supportive supervisor, and it's also important who you pick as supervisors. You have to really get on with that person on a level and you don't have to like them, or I'm not saying you have to be friends, but you have to have a respectful working relationship that will see through the 3 or 4 years that you have to work together, and you have to feel supported by the institution you're in and also the supervisors that you have.
Yeah, this is something that I always tell the people who ask me this question about what is the benefit of doing a PhD. The common answer that I get is, will I get a better pay after I complete my PhD? Like that's one main motivation that people have when they think about doing a PhD. And I always tell them that doing a PhD is a long-term commitment. It can go like from 3 years to 6 years to 7 years. So unless and until it's something that you're passionate about and it's something that you really want to do, you will lose your interest as you go, as you proceed. And the salary and those things, I don't know how much it will be able to, make you reach the finish line unless you have that motivation.
Yeah, and you have to think of it in the long term. So in the short term, of course, the PhD doesn't pay more. It doesn't. Yeah. You actually may end up getting paid less, considering in relation to the amount of work you put in. But in the long term, the opportunities it opens. Actually, I think it is, you have to have a long vision with a PhD. It's not a short-term thing. And you have to look at a long view of your career, where you want to be, what interests you, what motivates you, what gets you out of bed to go to work every day. If it's just your salary, then no, the PhD is not for you.
Yeah.
But I don't know what would be. You know, there has to be a passion and a motivation and an interest and a commitment to looking at the long vision of what do you want out of your career and what do you want to do. So for me, if I had to go back now and work in a pharmacy, and I do it sometimes, I do locum occasionally when I'm in the UK, just to understand, you know, keep my hand in pharmacy. It's such a different world to me now. And if I had to go back and do that day in, day out, I think I would find it, I'm not the person I was when I was doing that work in 2002 or 2003, you know, so it's the growth that comes with going on the path of a PhD and the opportunities it opens for you, including consultancy work that you can do, including working, like I mentioned, with NGOs, with NPOs, with colleagues in different countries. And it's a state of constant curiosity and learning, which is really rewarding. Is you know, you pick on topics that are of interest to you and you can pursue them, and you can work with people that you like, and you can answer some of the questions that you find interesting. So it's not just about money, but if you're only for money, then yeah, in the short term, it won't be. In the long term, it might still, but in the short term, no.
Yeah. And you also touched upon a very important aspect of research, that is networking. Like you said that you were always interested to work with colleagues from different countries, and that's that has always been the advice that you have given me, that networking is very important, whether it's people from your own country or professionals from other countries. But I think networking is a skill that pharmacists don't, they're not trained in doing networking, and, you know, how to network, what is the benefit of it. That's not something that you are trained while you are in your pharmacy college. It's something that you acquire as you go along. And for me, it has been quite challenging to actually go and meet people, talk to them, and just getting the flow of it. So since you have this experience, what are some, I mean, is there any advice that you could give to pharmacists? Like how can you do a networking? How do you network?
So I think it's important the teams, look, it's about, so for me, it was the institution I was working with, the group I was working with, it was very international. Alison Holmes is very well connected. But it's also my personality, right? There were other people in the team, but I clicked and I worked and I wanted to come and work with India and South Africa, and I made it happen. That opportunity was there for everyone. Other people chose other paths. So it's partly who you are and your personality, but it's also important to look at the opportunities around you, at the institutions and the people that you choose to work with, the organizations you choose to work with. There will always be opportunities for networking. It's how you seek them and how you use those opportunities. I mean, I look at you and the FCPI, and this is amazing networking, right? And this all came out of you doing your PhD and connecting with colleagues, going to conferences, presenting your research. So one of the things I always promote with Pharmacist is we do a lot of really good work. Doesn't matter, even if you're not doing a PhD, even if you're not academic, that is not spoken about or presented. I always encourage pharmacists to present their work in conferences, whether it's oncology or pediatrics or infectious diseases, whatever specialty you're working in, whatever, if you're looking at antibiotic use or drug use, pharmacovigilance, all of these topics, clinical trials that you're working in, be proactive about presenting your work, doing a small study, which doesn't take a lot of effort, but putting it at a conference as an abstract, because then that opens the opportunity for you to meet with like-minded colleagues who are doing research. And I find conferences and meetings a really good place to network, to connect with people who are doing similar work. And I know there is issue around funding to go to these conferences, but, you know, you can look nationally, you can look at locally, you can look within your state, what is happening across the organizations, particularly in a place like India, where it's public-private, making those bridges between public-private institutions to learn from one another. These are all really important. So I rate networking very highly. I think it is important for us, and particularly for pharmacists, to be present and to speak about and raise awareness about all the amazing things that pharmacy profession can and does do, which is often overlooked because we're not as good in promoting our work, particularly in presenting it in different fora where and in multidisciplinary teams. And I think that's something which is important. The other thing is organizations like FCPI, there is international organizations. I think there's FIP, Fédération International Pharmaceuticals. It's a French organization, French-speaking organization. But, there are other look at beyond your own country. You can look at the region, what is happening in terms of clinical pharmacy, how can you get involved? There's a lot of free mailers that people join, mailing lists like UK CPA is one of them. You can join the United Kingdom Clinical Pharmacy Association. There are lots of resources that are actually free, which gives you, and now we live in such a connected world. There are so many free webinars you can join to connect with people and learn from what other people are doing. But networking is very important. And I would always say yes to opportunities, because you never know what other doors are beyond that encounter and who you will meet and how you will engage with people and what opportunities may come about. So I think, yeah, that would be my advice.
I think I would really like to emphasize one point that you just mentioned, that is presenting the amazing work that clinical pharmacists are doing here, because especially in a country like India, where, clinical pharmacy is still kind of evolving and people are just accepting the role of a clinical pharmacist. I think it's extremely important that the amazing work that everyone is doing across India is presented and is published. So those are something that I always reiterate with even the students, because they are doing a lot of amazing research projects, not just in infectious diseases, but in a lot of areas.
Especially from India. From India. And so in the field of infectious diseases, ESCMID Global, the European Society for Clinical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, they have an annual meeting, ECMID, which is always in a European city. And through ESCAP, and I would encourage people who are doing infectious disease pharmacy to join ESCAP. It's not that expensive to join from a low middle income country, but we open £1,000 awards for people, travel grants. And
there's
been so many colleagues from India who've attended the last couple of ESCMIDs, and I love that, and I really nice seeing that. And they're presenting abstracts that are from audits that they have done in there. It's not always a randomized control. It rarely is actually a randomized controlled trial or a full-on study, but it's sharing practice is really important. And some of our colleagues in India are getting that now, are very good at it, but I think it should be expanded to lots of other institutions in India where pharmacists can publish their or present their work and submit work. Submitting an abstract is free. If you're accepted, then you can look at opportunities for funding, for scholarships, for sponsorships to go.
Yeah, and last year there were few students also who came in. They're not just practicing clinical pharmacy; they were clinical pharmacy students, and I was so happy to see them present their work at an international conference, and that was amazing to see.
Exactly.
So when we talk about the qualities that a clinical pharmacist should have if they want to build a research career, for me, I think, like you rightly said, it's having a very intriguing mind to explore more and to be very inquisitive about knowing more, understanding more, and looking at different aspects, to looking things at a different angle. So that is one very important skill I think we as clinical pharmacists need to have if we want to build a career in research. So from your experience, what do you think are some of the skills that people need to inculcate?
To do research?
Yeah.
I think there has to be a degree of self-awareness. So for me, the pharmacy training program, undergraduate, is actually really comprehensive and sets you on a really good footing to be able to do research and become a researcher. But we often aren't aware of it. We lack that self-awareness as a profession. And it's partly to do with hierarchies, with the tensions or the sort of relationships between medical profession and pharmacy profession. And I think that's the self-awareness is really important, and knowing our own skill sets and owning it. and being confident with it. Like a lot of the pharmacovigilance work, the pharmacotherapeutics knowledge that we have, the PKPD knowledge that we have as pharmacists, are really valuable skills that we don't then nurture post-graduation. We kind of fall into this lull of just dispensing medicines or just working the clinical daily work, which is also very important. But alongside that, I think it's important to have that awareness of the skills we have. A lot of skills we don't use as pharmacists. We're not given the opportunities to use as pharmacists. I would always look for opportunities. So when we have a luxury of having access to a whole, particularly if you work in hospital settings, a huge, broad cross-section of disciplines. If you're working in a hospital, you're most likely working with people who are doing a lot of world-class research, but you're not aware of it. You're not talking to them. You're not going to seminars. You're not going to meetings. You have to put yourself up. You have to offer yourself sometimes and your skills for people to understand that you're there and you have something to offer. Because in the medical profession, it's very well planned. The process of postgraduate training in medicine is very clear. That clarity is lacking in pharmacy profession. So often we graduate and we think, okay, now that's it. We can go and get a job. And that effort and thought hasn't gone into postgraduate training for pharmacists. And I think we need to change that. So I think it's important to participate in opportunities that come up in the environment you're in, whether it's joining a research team, whether it's providing data, gathering data that you can then, as we just discussed, present, doing audits and small studies, but also engaging with and putting yourself forward for collaboration with colleagues, I think is really important. And learning to work with people. You don't have to do anything on your own. You don't have to suffer in silence, or you don't have to work in silence or alone. So it's looking at opportunities to collaborate.
Something else that I've really observed is the medical professionals, the medical doctors, throughout their training, there's a very good emphasis on research. Like even when they're doing their postgraduate training, even once they become like consultants and professors, they have they put a lot of emphasis on research, and doing quality research is actually important for them to get their promotions, to get their salary increments, to progress in their career. So research is very much an important part of their career, even when they are like full-time full-time medical doctors, or even even though they have a very busy schedule, they give a lot of priority to research. But somehow I find that when it comes to clinical pharmacy, you are either a full-time clinical pharmacist who are in the wards doing patient care, or you are a research pharmacist doing like full-time research. Somewhere that the connection between these two and combining these two, like research and clinical work together, I find that in India, it is not that evolved. It's a bit lacking. There are people who are doing it. There are full-time clinical pharmacists who have started publishing their work as well. But I think somehow we don't realize that it is important, even as a clinical pharmacist, that you do some kind of research, you explore that aspect of your career, publish your work. So those things, I think, are not given adequate importance.
There is a history behind that, because medical research is dominated by the medical profession. Right. So a lot of the funding that comes through for medical research is funding doctors or those who are medically trained to do the two. So, and it was the same, for example, I have a Wellcome Trust fellowship now. Henry Wellcome was a pharmacist. But for the last century, it's been a medically dominated institution, and it's recently that and there wasn't a track, there still isn't a track for allied healthcare professionals. The NIHR didn't have a track for allied healthcare professionals until recently, and now they're beginning to recruit more and more pharmacists into supporting clinical pharmacists to do research. So it's historically, it hasn't been the case, but it is changing over time. And there's two ways change can happen. One is ground up, that pharmacists can if more and more pharmacists are active in the research space, then from sort of top down. There will also maybe some pharmacy, sort of the societies in the different countries that support pharmacy profession may decide to create opportunities and funding, but also we can become more competitive so that we can go for applications to do research and get funding for it as part of our clinical practice. So it comes down to funding and research funding and where the funding is going. Because when an institution employs you as a pharmacist, obviously they want you to do your job.
Yeah.
The institution, this is the problem, is the funding to support. For medics, it's different. Medics have other research funding that comes in to support their careers and for them to be able to do both.
Right.
A lot of the pharmacists who do research end up in pharma. But then that's a very different type of research. It's for drug discovery and drug development and manufacturing. So those are the differences that exist, which we need to navigate. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but we need to understand these differences and we need to navigate them. And we need to champion and highlight where there is positive examples of pharmacy-led research. And I'm so glad, like what you're doing with FCPI, other people in India who may be coming through to do. And the other thing in India to bear in mind is the difference between pharmacologists and pharmacists. Often it's the pharmacologist who do stewardship, but they're actually medically trained or through the pharmacology track. And then they take on the roles of infection control and antibiotic stewardship programs. So it's important to highlight where it is pharmacists who are doing this. Because unless you're visible, people won't realize you're doing this kind of work and that you are capable to do this kind of work.
Also, since you have like over 10 years of experience in research arena, what do you see as like a good progression, good career development, career growth in research side? Like you start as a junior research pharmacist, then say you do a PhD. After that, what do you think are some of the right steps to take if there are people out there who want to know about it?
I don't think there are right or wrong steps. I think it depends on life circumstances. It depends on the opportunities that are available. It depends on the environment in which you are. All of these impact. But if you do a PhD and it takes your career into research and academia, that's wonderful. If it takes you into working in industry and drug discovery, that is also valuable. So it's wherever your knowledge contribution post-doc is most valuable and that you're able to capitalize on that, I think that's a win. And, you know, what we have to remember is nobody's PhD is going to change the world. In fact, I just shared it with a couple of other colleagues here. There's a very nice diagram about it on social media, how the whole sphere of knowledge in any given topic is this massive circle, like pie chart. And at the very end, there is this little dent that's like 1 pixel. And that's the contribution of a PhD student to the body of knowledge. So part of a PhD success story is your growth as a candidate and where it's taken you, skills you have gained. For me, the most rewarding thing from my PhD was the work it generated. So it generated the collaboration with India and South Africa, and 4 more people got their PhDs, including you and Candice and others. You know, so it's that domino effect that you are able to impact another person's career and their path and what they contribute to knowledge. So together it becomes much bigger as it progresses over time. So there is not a cut and paste template. It's not like that. I can't really say. It is very competitive in a postdoc world as well. It's important to realize funding is limited. This is where collaboration becomes really important. This is where the collaborations you have built through your PhD and the teams you have been working with pays dividends in the postdoc space, because you carry on working with people like we are now. You and I are still working together because we are getting grants to work together, because we have built a process. We have built a body of knowledge and team that is able to deliver and carry on the research. So that is important, but that's not always achievable. But it's not the end of the world if it isn't, because we would have gone in other directions and we would have done other things. The space of health is so vast and so much work is required in different aspects that I don't think one would ever run out of work as a postdoc. There will always be things to contribute and work towards.
Since you mentioned about funding and getting funds even after doing your PhD, that actually brings to my next point of discussion. That is, what are some of the key aspects or key things that funders look in your proposal, in your CV? Like, I always tell people that when you apply for funding, publication is something that they definitely do consider. Like, how has been your experience over the years?
Yeah.
What are the kind of publications you have done, presentations you have done, projects that you have worked in? So that is something I have understood that that's something that they give a lot of weightage. But from your experience, what do you think are some of the key certain areas that they look for?
For a PhD, it depends. It depends what you're going for. So if you, as a PhD entry level, I don't expect, or funders don't expect you to have been publishing in the Lancet or, you know, in major journals. But what they do expect is the demonstration of your writing skills and that you have shown some interest to pursue this path. So if you have an abstract accepted in a conference, is very important. If you have published, authored something with colleagues, it shows you can work as a member of a team. It shows that you have writing skills. It shows that you understand the academic process of writing a peer-reviewed manuscript and having it published. So at a PhD level, that's what people would want. They would want to see that you're in a supportive environment. So this is why it's important, the institution and the mentors that you pick, the supervisors you pick are important, and their track record, their ability to see a student to completion. The idea that you're proposing, whether it's something you've come up with yourself or it's whether a PhD that you're going to work as part of someone else's program, it's about its novelty. So with the PhD, the most important thing is what new novel piece of scientific knowledge are you contributing to? So what are you contributing to the body of knowledge we have on the topic? The empirical value of your work is important. It has to be something that hasn't been done before. Now, it can be very subtle. It doesn't mean you have to think completely from scratch, but what you are going to propose to do must be something that there is a need for it. There is a scientific need, and it will add value to the body of knowledge we already have. So those are the important things when we look at a PhD, at a PhD entry level for a candidate to consider how successful they would be.
I think what you just said would be useful for a lot of people who are looking for funding opportunities, so they can modify and they can work towards that, keeping these points in mind. Exactly. I actually want to go back to a point that you keep mentioning, that is about the choosing the right supervisors when it comes to doing PhD or doing research. And that's one thing that I really want to discuss with you, that is how do you mentor early career researchers? Because for me, having worked with you for so long and with Sanjeev sir, I've seen that you all put a lot of importance on building the career of the early career researchers who you are mentoring. And for me, that is one very important quality that one needs to look up for when they are selecting their mentors or when they're selecting their supervisors, because those supervisors need to be very much invested in the career growth, in the opportunities, give the early career researchers their due recognition, support their work, give them the right guidance. So I think I would really like to know what are some of the key benefits that you would have received doing this mentorship, and why do you keep doing it?
So for me, like I said to you, the value is seeing another person grow, to pass on the knowledge and the skills and be a part of that person's journey. I find it very rewarding. And then I see that person helping another 2 or 3 people. And, you know, that's a domino effect. I think that for me, it's about human relationships. I put a lot of effort and invest a lot in building relationships with the people that I work with. And I think that's just a different, it's different mindsets, right? I don't look at you as someone who's just going to write papers for me, or is going to produce work. I look at you as someone who's going to grow, and where that growth is going to take you and how that's going to shape your career and your life. Because often in academia is very competitive, and people are just using each other. And I've never responded to that. And I think it is important to realize you don't have to always be like that to be successful. You can invest in people, you can have a human perspective and still do well in academia. And I think so, yeah, it's building, and I get a lot out of the mentorship and just seeing people enjoy the joy that people have from doing research, and the rewards are really wonderful, but it has to be in a space where people feel they are supported, they are nurtured, and that the work is actually valuable.
And yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's really important to us. And sometimes it means you're fighting against systems, because systems aren't always like that, as we've found out very recently. But it's important from a human perspective to always look at human capacity development is really important to me. And to do this in an international space for infectious diseases is very important. So for me, the cultural exchange, the relationships that we have built with colleagues in different countries, and the collaborations that we have is really phenomenal. And I wouldn't have this in any other job. So I feel very lucky to have been given these opportunities and to be where I am today and do this work with you, with the insights we get from trying to change people's lives in different contexts. A little bit. We're not going to ever be able to change people's lives completely. We can't get rid of poverty or sexism or antibiotic resistance, but it's adding a little bit to the understanding in these fields to see how we can make our own lives and the lives of other people better is really important. Yeah.
I'm just realizing these things that you just said, because I just started mentoring few other pharmacists, and that's when I really realized that mentorship is actually like a two-way path. So it's not just you guiding, you ordering someone else, from a place of power, you are just giving directions, you're just giving orders to someone else. It's not that. It's just understanding the other person, learning from the other person, and that actually opens a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities for both, like not just for the mentee, but also for the mentor.
That's the thing, right? You learn. I also learn, but also I learn about myself, about what I am like as a mentor, what I am like as a person to be around, and how I can improve. And I think this is really important. And I hope the young generation of mentors and mentees become more and more like this, because the old school way of doing things is you never give feedback up. It's always downwards. So it's almost like saying, I am beyond learning. And I don't like that, because I don't want to ever stop learning about being a better person, being better in my relationships with people, in how I treat people. So I don't come, just going back to your question about what you said about me and Sanjeev, and I think Sanjeev is the same. We treat people like adults. So I don't like telling people off. I don't like disciplining people, because I think by the time we are in this space together, we are both adults. Your parents should have disciplined you. You should have had some of life. So it's treating people as an adult and expecting the person to rise to that. It's hit and miss. Sometimes it doesn't work, but when it does, it's great. And it's a much more rewarding and sort of collaborative relationship, which is important for growth.
And as a mentor, what are some of the, I wouldn't say qualities, but what are some of the considerations that you always give, or what are some of the things that you always keep in mind and you're mindful about the way you maybe interact with your mentees, guide them?
I had to learn to be patient, right? Because you're at a level and you expect everybody's at that level. And then, but if you were, they wouldn't be your mentees. So I think it's that learning that gap in learning and in experience that people need to reach to you. So you've got to give that slack to people to learn, that space to learn. And one thing that I still struggle with is when I let go and don't take over to do the job. When, let the person finish it, even if it's not to your standard, they have to finish it and they have to learn what they did wrong. Often, because we're working against time, it's like, oh, just give it, I'll finish it myself. That space I still struggle with is delegation and supporting the person to do the work, but letting them finish it. I think is a challenge sometimes. But it's like I said, it's very rewarding. It's the best way of teaching for me is this. I hate teaching, like I don't like lecturing, but I really enjoy one-to-one mentoring and working with people, because I think we're very lucky we're in a space where we just meet up and ask questions that we find interesting and try to answer those questions. It's a very unique, it's actually a lot of freedom in what we do. So the downside of not having a permanent job, or some of the insecurities that come with a permanent job, the upside of it is a lot of freedom, a lot of intellectual freedom, a lot of freedom in terms of time commitment. There are intense periods, but there are also periods when it's quiet, and the work-life balance can actually also work in your favor when you do this kind of work.
Yeah. That's one thing that I wanted to discuss. Like, what are the benefits of doing a career in research? Like, people always see the perks of, traveling around the world, meeting different people, but there's also a flip side to it. Like, you have to maybe spend hours and hours on writing or putting together a proposal.
Yes. Yeah, time commitment it's inflex. There is some, like, if there's a deadline, there's a deadline. Commitment to family, personal life. If you're always traveling, how will you have a family? How will you have a partner? How will you raise a family? So these are all challenges that people have to navigate, but ultimately it's also about doing what you enjoy and what you like. And especially for women, young women in research, I think there are still a lot of challenges, but it's also a very exciting time to be a part of this, because we're asking a lot of questions, including in our research going forward. We're looking at some of these questions around the gender differences and hierarchies in research and antibiotic resistance. And so I think there are challenges, but yeah, I personally find the benefits of what we do is far outweigh the challenges that we may have. And it comes back down to picking something that you enjoy doing. And if it's something you enjoy doing, those unpleasant parts of it become more tolerable, including working late night on a grant or getting... So the other thing is you have to grow a very thick skin, right? Because people will constantly trash your work. There is no such thing as perfection, because you're writing it. No matter how many times you work on it, it'll come back completely be read. I do it to you, the reviewers do it to me, the fund, it's a stepwise. We all do it to each other. But again, that is a way of, that takes learning too, to not take yourself seriously and not take your work so seriously. That is beyond, what's the word? Beyond, lost my thread of thought, beyond correction. So that we all have, this is the nice thing I like about academia, actually. Everybody learns that your work can be trashed by somebody else who has a different opinion. And it's that's learning that the skill and the humility, epistemic humility. I think you have to have a lot of humility to be able to tolerate this work. But it's very good. It's a good skill to have.
Yeah, I mean, I always remember what you said when I first submitted my manuscript and I got rejected from the first journal. Like, it was a right away desk rejection. Within 3 days, I got the email that my paper is rejected. And I remember you writing to me that every article has its own home and it will find its home. And that's something I always tell everyone, that, we will get a lot of rejections, but finally it will end up in a good place. And I feel that these rejections also help improve your manuscript.
Absolutely. The way I look at it is somebody has spent their own time to give you feedback on how to improve your work. That's how you have to see it. This person is not getting paid to read your manuscript. They have no interest in it. It's not their area of, it's not their work. And still they've read it and they've told you how you can improve it. And that's that's the power of peer review. And I think it's something we should celebrate more rather than be upset when people give you feedback that isn't wonderful.
Yeah. So I think we can wind up the podcast. It was so great to have this discussion with you. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I hope it was equally enjoyable to you. And
no, it's always good to reflect, and it's so nice to see where you are. And that's, this is why we do what we do. I'm so glad. And I hope it inspires other people to also look at alternatives to their careers.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Asmita.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lovely. All done?